Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, and some games you just look at that first trailer and you know it's got the it factor down. And that was Space Marines 2. I haven't really watched any coverage of this game leading up to its launch. I just saw that first trailer and went, yeah, I'm in, absolutely. And I also played the first Space Marines game to prepare myself for this one. I was that excited. And honestly, that was a pretty damn good choice because right now my 6-hour investment in the 2011 campaign is gonna have some pretty sweet ROI because Space Marines 2 is an absolute treat. It is both a spectacle and a triumph. Like the way Space Marines 2 manages to honor the original game and its design while elevating everything else it seemed it wanted to do but couldn't should just be applauded. For every time my jaw dropped from this game's grotesque violence, my eyes literally popped out of my head at the awe-inspiring beauty of this world. It's something I genuinely wasn't ready for how pretty this game is. And it's beyond just ooh, ah. The visuals do so much for the narrative, so much for the world building, and I will get right into that because many of you know I'm really about is the story fun? Is the gameplay fun? Am I interested in what's going on here? But the visuals aid that so much. It's earned itself its own section in this review, which I never do if you watched a lot of my reviews before. But before any of that, we gotta talk about today's sponsor. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and it's available now for free on PC and consoles. You can take command of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. There's a game mode for every type of player because War Thunder offers 3 distinct modes, each ramping up realism progressively. There's arcade for those who want fast pace, there's simulator mode, which ditches all of the guardrails for the ultimate challenge, and there's even realistic mode, which is like the perfect middle ground. All of them though are incredibly fun, and there's a ton of customization as well, with a comprehensive system of countless camouflages, historical markings, decorations for all types of vehicles. There's a worldwide community of over 70 million players waiting for you to join in these epic PvP battles, so what are you waiting for? Play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox now using my link in the pinned comment or video description. New and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms that includes multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator, Eagle of Valor, 100,000 silver lines, and 7 days of premium account. It's available for a limited time only, so be quick, and thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. There's no doubt in my mind that this game will single-handedly reel in thousands of new fans of the Warhammer franchise who want to deeply understand every term rattled off and location that they witness. The way it manages to build off the flawed yet entertaining romp of the first game's story is commendable as well. Truly, Relic Entertainment, the former devs, did not actually give Saber Interactive much to work with outside of a cliffhanger ending, and they took that baton pass, if you will, and crafted something I found to be pretty compelling. Even better is that Space Marines 2 is a dense game packing a 10-hour campaign that can be played fully in co-op alongside its shockingly deep side story mode in Operations. Oh, and there's also PvP in the Eternal War mode, but I couldn't try that yet due to the servers being down. This game is also built off some of the technology that was developed for World War Z, which is a phenomenal zombie horde game that if you haven't tried, you absolutely should. It's in this game that you see hordes aren't for show, as zombies will literally form towers upon themselves to reach you, and they'll be there in mass as you mow all of them down. And Space Marine 2 is right in that same pocket. Now, Space Marines 2 doesn't get literally everything right. I played it on PC, and even running this thing at 1440p on high settings had my computer running so hot that OBS, my recording software, was giving me warnings often enough that I actually had to crank things down to 1080p. This is purely anecdotal, but since Baldur's Gate 3 gave me the same issue, and I saw others mentioning a similar problem then, I thought I'd document it here so you're well aware of that. There's also some questionable design choices that are carried over from the original game, which I thought would have been best left in the past because they could have led to a better power fantasy. I'll get into that a little bit, and while the chaos in this game is great, no, I don't mean that chaos, some of the encounters can get so hectic, like fighting off a horde of Tyranids at the same time as a massive boss swinging at you, and its minions whose attacks can only specifically get parried, where it feels like the game is sometimes setting you up for failures. The good news though, at the end of all that, is all these are things worth noting that you should be aware of, but none of it at all detracted from my experience with Space Marines 2, which is one of the most excellent games of the year and also one of the most refreshing. So let's begin all of this with opening up with the story, because the question I had stepping in as someone who was pretty much on media blackout for this game was, how is Space Marines 2 going to carry things forward all of this time later. You have to remember the first entry is stuck on the 360 and PS3 and PC, like it's just there, and the story wasn't much to write home about until at least I think the final moments. Then you had something there. How much would they have carried forward 13 years later? And it turns out, if you paid close attention to that, if you remember it very well, quite a lot. They build upon it pretty strictly. Now, I do think you can enjoy Space Marines 2 independent of that story, but I do think having that context adds so much that it's worth going back for the extra ROM. You'll once again feel the Space Marine armor as Titus, the stoic protagonist from said first game, and it's in a time that only knows war. It's out with the orcs and in with the Tyranids who are swarming, literally, and threatening humanity. And it's a story about your duty as a Space Marine and where the line gets drawn between right and wrong when enacting said duty, and as expected, it's swimming with religious overtones. The story opens up with Titus continuing his sworn service to the Emperor, despite the original game's conclusion, and what was lacking in Game 1, I felt, was a compelling cast to surround Titus. Now, admittedly, Titus himself wasn't much of an interesting character until the dying moments of that story where they cliffhang you, but fortunately, I think the payoff is here for all of you who waited 13 years for this moment. Characters like Gadriel and Charon really round out the story as they're willing to challenge Titus, his motives, his past, and even have stories of their own that slot in nicely to lift up the overall narrative. One of the best surprises with this game is that there are moments where all three of them are interacting frequently. As someone who played the first game recently, I was a little bummed out that the cast of characters just barely spoke to one another, because when they did take time to chat to each other, it was some of the more gripping parts of the game. So to see that this game took note of that and embraced its characters more really adds a layer. And there are surprises in this, especially if you played the first game, that I will not ruin for you, that I really liked. And it ends in a spot that does not cliffhang you, but makes you certainly look forward to more in the future. If I were to make a comparison for the game's dialogue, it's effective in making you care as each conversation's passing by, just like the original Gears of War trilogy. And speaking of Gears, there may be a new gory chainsaw game in town that's here to take the throne, so they might want to pay attention when it comes to making E-Day, but we'll talk about that right now. Let's get a bit into the gameplay. Space Marines 2 simply refuses to waste your time. I don't know how else to put it. Like, there's so many games nowadays that function more as black holes and less as games than ever before. And it's so refreshing to have a game like Space Marines 2 existing in this current market that says, hey, you can show up, just beat this story and leave, or if you want more, we have this operations mode for you, and you can fully indulge in this brand new progression system and stay here for a while, plus the 1-year battle plan that they have planned out for Space Marines 2, where they're really gonna go in on the support for this franchise. It reminds me a little bit of other games out there where they don't start off as live service, but because they're really good and people want more, they kind of become live service in a weird way. The entirety of the narrative structure here is quite linear. There's no open zones, hubs, worlds, whatever you want to call it. It's minimal off the beaten path exploring, and it shoots you straight forward for the most part. If I were to give a comparison, it would actually be another Focus Home published title in Evil West, where you see the tricks of a bygone generation, like knowingly leaping into some level design for combat, where you'll just see like the way the arena's laid out, the weapons around it. Oh, I'm gonna fight here, which for some can serve as an immersion breaker. I do think that Space Marines 2 handles it better, but there's definitely a lot of like hold X to interact, which closes the door behind you and opens the one in front of you, effectively loading the level in and getting you ready for the next phase. Now, for me, I miss this kind of stuff because I think more games should be made this way, where it's a strong linear focus, so I didn't mind, but I know everyone differs on that. And I don't mean to load this review with recency bias, but I absolutely love that finally there's a true co-op game out. Look, I say this with all due respect, we do have a lot of co-op games, but all of them fall in the same survival, crafting bucket. It's constant, it's nauseating, there needs to be something new out there, and it's so nice to have a game that says, here's a full, meaty campaign, play it with 2 other friends. Here's a full mode called Operations, play it with 2 other friends and have this replayability there. Here's PvP if you want to indulge in that. This is how I think it should be done, where I think games are just putting the cart before the horse too often. Like, oh, we need to be live service first. It's like, no, make a good game first and then figure out how to support that afterwards. The gameplay structure is similar to that of the first Space Marines game in that it's both a third-person shooter and an action game, except the sequel controls and feels much better. You'll have an assortment of melee weapons, again, from daggers and power swords to chain swords and massive hammers that are so satisfying to use. The arsenal of guns at your disposal is admittedly familiar, but there are some new members of the family, if you will, that give variations to said guns. There are also weapons like a flamethrower and a Gatling gun that certainly do vary things up. And that's really the secret sauce of this campaign, as they really do do have something new to mess with in every mission. Now, if you've played World War Z, some of the mission structure, at times you'll feel that faint hint of familiarity of, oh, I'm building up to the big horde fight. Fortunately, not all the missions end in that way. In fact, very little do as you get deeper into the game, and it becomes much more than that. But they're so well set up narratively where the stakes feel at their highest when these hordes are coming your way, and at the same time they're giving you typically new toys to play with, that each horde throwing themselves at you is actually a welcome sight. Now, melee is the most effective against these hordes of Tyranids, while some are much stronger and require parrying. Timing your parries can allow for an execution that restores your armor, and unlike the first game, you actually don't take damage while doing this. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Like, I don't care that it was 2011. Who thought that was a good idea to do that? That blew my mind that that was in the game, because I died so many damn times because I was executing someone trying to get my health back in that game, and there were no other health pickups really, and yeah, I would just die constantly because I'd be executing someone and the animations are long. Now you get to really indulge in the gory beauty that is Space Marines 2. Execute as many enemies as you want and don't fear for your life as you do it. In fact, you'll kill enemies around you as you execute the one that's right next to you. Plus, Doom might have a competitor in this area because there are some executions that are on that level. The sound design for these weapons and executions is downright impeccable too. Guns have a real pop to them, while executions have some of the most visceral sound effects. Like, you'll just hear the actual flesh ripping and the popping. It's gross. And yes, they're that good, so why don't you take a listen for yourself? I think my favorite thing to do, especially because the way the camera works, is when you weaken an enemy, you'll see a little crosshair appear above their head, and you'll be able to press the right trigger to shoot your gun, and it'll pull the camera in. You'll just pull out the sidearm and pop them right in the head. It is so sick, man. Like, it makes you feel so cool when you do that, then chain to another execution. I guess the only improvement I think that could be here is multi-enemy executions. It's really easy to get them in the stun states. I think the executions have a good pace, but I would love to see if I could just take out 2 enemies at once, especially because it's a third-person game with lots of camera space. I think you could fit that in. I think that'd be a really good improvement for the title. Now, you're not just gonna be stuck with parrying, and you're not as glued to the ground in this game as you were in the first Space Marines game. I'd say the only drawback with this Space Marines game is that I wish they had a jump button, or the jump packs were more of a permanent inclusion inside your kit rather than levels being built around that. That is a bit of repeated design elements I was kind of talking about when it came to Space Marines 1 into Space Marines 2, but I think they handle it a lot better here because I don't feel too glued to the ground thanks to things like the dodge roll, which is really useful for enemies that are going to attack you hardcore. Also, good news is that each melee weapon has their own assortment of combos, so you can switch between light attack and heavy attack, and there are some weapons that even allow mode switches, like the power sword allows you to do speed or strength depending on what you need in that situation and what enemy you're facing. So I really liked the assortment of weapons here across the board. They were all really effective. And this is all important to note because some boss fights will actually demand a level of mastery of these mechanics, and you can lock onto these bosses. They have their own health bars, like straight up boss fights, which another thing I did not expect in this game at all. And they have their own mechanics. Some get a little repeated, but not to the point where I was like, what is this rehashed garbage here? It wasn't anything like that, but you know, it's something worth noting for sure. There's also the Righteous Fury ability you may remember from the first game, which allows you to activate by pressing the Y button, and you'll literally run over your enemies and practically one-hit all of them while regaining your health. And fortunately, you're not gonna do all of the heavy lifting yourself. So as I already mentioned, this is a full co-op game, but what I wanna emphasize to people who are playing solo, like I did during this review period, is the AI in this game is good. Really, really good. It made me so happy to see this, especially granted I'm coming off of reviewing Star Wars Outlaws where I saw how bad the AI was there, so I know there's a bit of a scale differentiation here I'm looking at, but at the same time, they were so reliable in combat. I really have to say, honestly, I didn't feel like I was missing a beat when it came to playing with AI teammates. Now, you can matchmake for things like operations. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I just gotta say, shout out to the AI engineers because, oh my God, they cooked. Like, you can see like your own teammates executing Tyranids that were about to jump on you, shooting them down, helping you take out the hordes. Like, they're truly reliable. They do feel like they're part of the team, and that was such a welcome surprise because usually these games, it's like you're handling it all because they want you to absorb the action, but I think they do just enough with the AI where they're not completely taking over the fights, but damn, they're effective. But I keep bringing up this operations, this side mode, if you will, and I shouldn't even call it a side mode because honestly, it might be the main meat of the game, frankly. And I was so shocked when I opened this thing up. So let me tell you a bit about this, right? So remember what I just said about the campaign's gameplay? Well, yeah, it turns out that's just how Titus plays, right? So this whole righteous fury ability and how he's handling things, that's just one way to play. So you actually have 6 classes in operations, each with their own weapons, abilities, skill trees for both the class and the weapon, plus unique cosmetic customization options. Keep in mind there is an in-game store. And I will say here that this is where the media blackout really helped me out, because I didn't know about this at all. And it was such a cool surprise. You know, when fighting games back then, you'd fire them up and you'd unlock a random secret character in a way you never expected. You're like, I didn't know they were in this game. I didn't know you could do that. It was like experiencing that again. I was just so happy to discover that, because, you know, using my fighting game example again, you think about how they're marketed nowadays. You know, pretty much what you see is what you get. They're going to tell you everything about the game before you dive in. So for me, like hopping in and just seeing how deep the operations mode was, like I went through the whole campaign like, all right, we'll get into that side thing afterwards. I'm like, no, this is like the main game right here. This is insane. And fortunately, it has a major meaning behind the game. It's not just, oh, you want more? Here's more. During the main story, there'll be times Titus is like, I need another team. And those are the missions you're doing. And they're full-fledged missions. Like they're not just, oh, like go kill these enemies. Like there are people bantering between each other. Like there are party members bantering with one another. There's comms between Titus and this team. There's whole on mission objectives, and like there's whole on unique mechanics to these missions. Like they have their own sets of spectacles and views. Like they did not get lazy with this. This is an additive. Like just keep that in mind. The main story is really impressive into its own way, but this is like really where the main meat of the game is, and it's really good, especially because I love how different some of these classes play. Like I fired at the Vanguard because immediately I thought of Mass Effect, and funny enough, just like the Vanguard class in Mass Effect, I'd press the Y button and I would just dive bomb someone. In this game, you get a grapnel launcher, which I never found in the campaign at all. And what do? I attach it to a Tyranid and I dive kick this son of a gun. Are you kidding me? Like it feels so good. They have their own unique animations, weapons, as I already said. They also have their own unique executions, voice lines for executions. Like it's a full-on other dimension of the game. Again, I was just so blown away by this that you are going to be able to, if you played the main story and you like that, you're going to get so much more out of this game, because that's where you can just go to the operations mode. You can finish missions, level up, spend skill points, up the difficulty. Like there is a lot here. And it reminds me a little bit, I brought Mass Effect earlier, of that Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, where I love Mass Effect 3, you know, hey, shame me if you will, but I really did from top to bottom. And my favorite part of that game really was the multiplayer. Like I loved how Mass Effect's gameplay was, and to fire up that horde mode centric game mode and just have a blast with all these different classes, it was so exciting. So yeah, it reminds me a lot of that, which was one of my favorite multiplayer experiences ever. Now, I mentioned that this video does have its own dedicated visual section, and that's right here, right now, because it is just a treat to look at every step of the way. The beautiful way the story marries its art direction is worthy of celebration, in my opinion. For me, the standout was Avarax, with its skyscraping Imperial Gothic architecture, boasting stunning palaces and cathedrals as you march through them, spouting about heretics. It just felt so original. Witnessing the gilded churches placed amidst a harsh, metallic metropolis as hellfire rains upon its cities had such a meeting of many worlds visual identity, where it felt both familiar and unique. And the color palette here, as I'm sure you've already seen, is much more refreshing in this go around compared to the first Space Marines game, where I know much of the 360 and PS3 games were defined by their overusage of brown, but obviously that's not the case here. I'll also admit I am a stop, slow pan the camera and have my main character moment type of gamer, but this game had me doing it at an obnoxious degree. And while the vistas are a sight to behold, I really appreciated the length the interior decorators went to when it came to littering the hallways with bodies, blood, tech, weapons, clutter. It all really captures the feeling of battles happening all over the place. It also helps that the game doesn't just allow you to spectate the war, but actively participate in it. Seeing hordes in the distance and knowing they're not for show, but simply something you'll be standing toe-to-toe with, adds a layer of buy-in that simply wouldn't be there without its visuals. It's something the original game yearned to accomplish as it threw dozens of orcs at you, but never really got all the way there due to obvious technical limitations. Here, it feels like the vision has been fully realized, and the participation in that war also stems from the extreme amount of gore. I've talked about the executions, but you'll leave literal environments in a different place than you found them, with limbs strewn about and blood painted everywhere. Honestly, most battles will leave your blue armor stained red as well. So yeah, that's like I just have so many good things to say about this game. So the question may be at the end of all this, like, well, what went wrong? You did say at the top of this that it didn't get everything right. And it's like, yeah, for the sake of being thorough, I should address some of the problems the game had. I already talked a bit about PC performance. Everything ran smoothly, no frame rate issues, but I did encounter that same issue I did with Baldur's Gate 3, where for me, it wasn't until months later that my computer could run that game at 1440, 60 frames without it sounding and feeling like an actual furnace. And mind you, I do have a PC packed with a 3080 i9 with 8 cores and 32 gigs of RAM, plus good cooling, and my PC's in a good spot, elevated on a hard surface, where I don't think it's a me problem here. Also, anytime I was done playing and went to quit out of the application, it froze the game, so I'd have to alt tab to my Steam library to stop the game from there. So yeah, on like the tech end, at least on PC, not perfect. The other thing that's not perfect is some of the combat design choices that I'm still trying to wrap my head around the why for them. For example, one of the worst parts about the first Space Marines game to me was how you could only have 4 weapons available at any given time and only swap those out with specific ones. So if I wanted to have 2 types of rifles with me, no can do. It severely limited the power fantasy and how I tackled encounters. In particular, the latter part was the big issue for me, as I'd be handed a sniper and a shotgun for the same scenario and step in unsure whether or not I'm ready for the fight coming up. And a lot of the game's difficulty in the first Space Marines stemmed from that, as well as the checkpoint system, because it could be so bad that I get caught in a sniper fight with a shotgun and have no real way to navigate that conflict. This game slashes the carryable weapons to 2, effectively repeating that same problem, as one of them is a sidearm that you cannot swap with any other primary weapon. This means that, yes, many of your encounters you'll approach with having a ton of weapons waiting for you outside that room. Some are better suited for said encounter than others, and you're really never gonna know, because they'll lay out a sniper, a shotgun, an assault rifle and be like, hey, here you go, don't you want all these options? But don't get me wrong, as a whole, Space Marines 2 does a better job at suggesting what weapon you may need to get the job done, but I wish, at least for the main campaign, I get it with co-op operations where it's a little more strict. I do wish in the main story they let me carry more firepower to offset things. That's because it does lead into a complaint I have that may not have existed if I was able to carry all these weapons with me, or if the game communicated better to me what weapons I needed for a particular encounter, and that is some of the encounter balancing. Sometimes I'd have Tyranids of all kinds throwing themselves at me, and not in the fun, oh my god, look at this horde kind of way. Like, there were times I'd whiff a parry, and because a horde hit me, then another enemy would hit me, and then it would continue the chain from there, and I'd lose all of my health. You're pretty durable at a normal difficulty, so it didn't result in many deaths, but it also didn't feel fair, and it makes me feel a tad weary about playing the game at higher difficulties, although I didn't get to fully test that out yet. But truly, that is the end of my list of complaints with this game. I do think Space Marines 2 is just absolutely fantastic from top to bottom. I think it manages to honor and build off the original in a really clever and intelligent way, at the same time as elevating what this franchise can be. And no doubt, as I said at the start, it's going to bring in a lot of new Warhammer fans. I mean, you're kind of looking at one right now. I mean, this game made me so curious about more, and I know I could start in a million areas, and I know I'm already taking on a lot with, like, I like Trails, and I like Yakuza, and I like Final Fantasy 14. Like, I already have enough big series I'm invested in. Like, what's one more, right? But dang, is this game good? If you're wondering whether or not you should pick this one up, I think you 100% should. Keep in mind, I played this on PC, so maybe some of the technical things I noted, like not being able to exit the application properly or the heating problems, may not stem to consoles, so go watch some console reviews and get informed on that side of the coin. But I will just say, as someone who didn't even touch the PvP yet, the PvE content is just so worthwhile and so replayable and so fun and so much of a spectacle that it's really good for those of you limited on time who want to pick up, play something, and move on. But for those of you who want to pick up, play a great campaign, and then move on into a fantastic co-op mode and hang around with this game a little bit longer, this game has you covered there, plus more support down the line. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my take on Warhammer 40K Space Marines 2. Absolutely loved it, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts down below. So fire away. With that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.